This video is for the note-taking guide entitled Apuntes, Verbos de Bota. There are some verbs in Spanish that have certain changes to the stem in the present tense. They're called boot verbs. You've already seen one verb like this, jugar. There are three different types of boot verbs. They are O to UE, E to IE, and finally, E to I. Okay, boot verbs can be AR, ER, or IR verbs, and it's important to still conjugate the verbs like normal using the present tense endings that we already know. So just as a reminder, let's go through the endings. The AR endings, O, AS, A, AMOS, AIS, AN. The ER endings, O, ACE, A, AMOS, ACE, AIN. And the IR endings, O, ACE, A, IMOS, IS, AIN. Remember, everything's the same as the ERs except for nosotros and vosotros forms. All right, type 1, the O to UE. Let's just do a quick review of what these mean. We have almorzar, to eat lunch, dormir, to sleep, poder, to be able or can, and volver, to return. Let's conjugate the verb volver to practice this. Remember, with stem changes, or boot verbs, it only occurs in the shaded regions, the ones that form the boot. So for our yo form, we're going to change that O in the stem to a UE. Vuelvo. Tú vuelves, él, ella, usted vuelve, nosotros volvemos, vosotros volváis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes vuelven. Remember, we call this a boot verb because it's only the forms within the boot that undergo a stem change. Type number 2, E to IE. So here we have querer, to want or to love, empezar, to begin, pensar, to think, preferir, to prefer, and entender, to understand. Let's conjugate the verb querer to practice. Again, remember, we're within the boot that the stem change occurs, so we form quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, queráis, quieren, where we change the E's in the boot to an IE. And type number 3, E to I. Repetir, to repeat, pedir, to order or to ask for, decir, to say. Let's practice this with our forms of decir. We're going to skip the yo form just for a moment, but remember everything within the boot will change, that E will change to an I. So the two form dices, él, ella, usted, dice, then decimos, decís, and dicen. So now let's go back and do the yo form. Because it's in the boot, the E is still going to change to an I, but the C changes to a G in this case to form the word digo, I say. This is only going to happen with decir. You're not going to see any strange changes like that happening with repetir or pedir. On those, you will only see the standard E to I stem change of a typical boot verb. Now I have a few hints for you that aren't on your paper. First, not all verbs with an O or E in the stem are boot verbs. Remember back to verbs like correr, it has an O, but it wasn't a boot verb, and it's still not gonna be. I will always tell you if a verb is a boot verb and what type of boot verb it is. On your vocabulary list, they'll appear like I've noted there in parentheses, or for example in this chapter on the PowerPoint presentation where I put that off to the side. The E that changes is always the second E in the stem. So we had several verbs like empezar, preferir, entender, and repetir, where there were two E's in the stem, and it's always going to be the second one that changes. This is different from querer, where there's only one E in the stem, so in that case we don't have to worry about which one changes. The last thing about boot verbs, there's no magic trick. You just have to memorize whether or not it's a boot verb and what type of boot verb it is. And I do have one last thing. It's not related to boot verbs at all, but it is something we covered in class today. The phrase ver una película. Ver is the verb there, and it's basically a normal verb where if we take off the ER ending, we're left with just the letter V as our stem. Conjugating this verb normally, where we use just the letter V as the stem and then add the regular endings, works for all of the forms except for the yo form. And in the yo form, we're just going to add the letter E in there to the stem, so we have veo. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's a normal verb. And I think that's enough of verbs for today, so we'll stop there. See you in class.